Playoff seeding, first round draft position, it's all at stake for Falcons Rams in this Monday Night Football finale.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Falcons and Locked On Rams, both part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in America, #1 on the planet, and #1 in the galaxy. And of course, today is a special crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Rams and Locked On Falcons, presented by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. If you do not know me, I'm the humble host of Locked On Falcons, Aaron Freeman, joined by Travis Rodgers, one of the hosts of Locked On Rams, your daily LA Rams podcast. And of course, today, because it's a crossover Thursday, we'll be getting you guys geared up for this Week 17 Monday Night Football action, the final Monday Night Football game of the 2025 season, breaking down keys to victory, keys matchup. But of course, we're talking about what's the big story for each of these teams heading into this matchup. And for the Rams, Travis, it seems to be playoff seeding, but at the same time, we'll see if once we get to Monday night, whether or not they really have anything to play for. And maybe that benefits the Falcons because they'll be playing for draft position. But break down sort of what the Rams are playing for in this Monday night game.
Yeah, Aaron, I think we're going to know exactly whether or not the Rams still have a shot at what they, every team in the league starts the season for, is to win your division, right? If the Rams get to Monday night and both Seattle and San Francisco have already won on Sunday, the Rams can't win the division. It's over. That one of those two other teams will do it. Now, if just one of them loses, then you got a chance coming into Monday night if the Rams can beat the Falcons. Of course, the Rams have the Arizona Cardinals in Week 18. So if the Rams can win their last two, and then you have Seattle and San Francisco lose at least one of their remaining two games, then the Rams still have a chance not only to win the division, but they still have a chance to get all the way back up to that #1 seed. If they both win on Sunday, then it doesn't really matter. Maybe the Rams are the 5, maybe they're the 6. There's still a little seeding thing that can go on there, but I don't think it makes a ton of difference whether they're the 5 or the 6, because, obviously you'd rather play Atlanta or Tampa Tampa or Carolina in this situation because it's a little bit of a better weather, that sort of things. But the Rams had the entire thing in the palm of their hand about 10 days ago, and the thing went poof like that. Just a absolutely bizarre Thursday night. So I'm sure they will be paying very close attention to what's going on around the league on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, and I think with the Falcons, this game boils down to draft position, and it's not the Falcons draft position, It's the Rams draft position because of the Falcons trading that future first in 2026 to go up and get James Pierce, who's played really well this season. Up to this point, has had a sack in 7 straight games, although the one he got last week against the Cardinals probably shouldn't have counted, but it is what it is. We won't complain when the statisticians help the Falcons out, because they rarely do. But it's really going to boil down to draft position, and the Falcons, in order to make that trade look less controversial, that the lower that the Rams are picking in the first round, the better. And so obviously that means the Falcons need to win this game in order to force the Rams to at least avoid a top 10. I think currently, if the draft was tomorrow, it would be the 11th overall selection. But obviously, that could move up or down depending on these next 2 weeks, a couple of spots here or there. But yeah, that's really what's at stake for the Falcons when it comes to winning this game. But also, it could be at stake in terms of where this coaching staff is, right? Raheem Morris and the coaching staff is on the hot seat. And Travis, it feels like yesterday when you came on the podcast back in like February of 2024, talking about how great, Raheem Morris was and how beneficial he was to the Rams. And it just hasn't quite worked out for the Atlanta Falcons that way.
No, it isn't, and I got to be honest, I'm a little surprised that it hasn't. I think they put him in a weird spot with the quarterback situation that they handed it to him when he came through the door. I don't know if anybody would have been able to. Here's your aging quarterback with an Achilles injury with a ginormous salary, and oh, by the way, we're taking another quarterback in the top 10. It just doesn't make any sense then. It doesn't make a ton of sense now, and I'm a huge Raheem Morris fan. I loved him when he was here in LA. Super easy to work with. I thought he was a great coach. I was optimistic that it worked there. Like you said, it really hasn't for I'm sure a variety of reasons, but I have not paid. It's been a weird season, Aaron, because I find myself rooting against the Falcons for the most obvious reason. I want that Rams pick to be as high as it can be. We still don't know what the Rams' future is going to look like at the quarterback position. It felt like a week or so ago that Matthew Stafford might win the MVP. The Rams might be the number 1 seed. They might be able to never leave SoFi Stadium until the Super Bowl, and he could do the John Elway walk-off shot, win the Super Bowl. Good night, everybody. See you later. Now, I don't know. Now, maybe this makes it more likely he leaves and they can take those 2 draft picks that they're going to have, package them to move up to get somebody for a quarterback. Not a great quarterback draft, but there's just so many different things going into this game. Even though the Falcons are out, the Rams are in. We're just talking about seeding, but this is a very important game for both these teams.
Yes, Stafford's still the favorite over at our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook in terms of winning the MVP, but the gap is sort of closing between him and some of the other candidates. But yeah, when it comes to Raheem Morris, this game I think is going to be a really good litmus test because the Falcons have won 2 straight. They're 3-2 since Kirk Cousins took over for an injured Michael Penix a couple of weeks ago. And the question here in Atlanta is, can the Falcons win enough games down the stretch to convince ownership to run it back with Raheem Morris because of the strong finish? And I think the last 2 wins over Arizona and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, while, good for the Falcons, I don't know if the performances of the Falcons in those games were as promising as you would want to basically say, like, yes, we want to run it back with this team. But if they can find a way to beat this Rams team, even a Rams team that may come out flat because they don't really have much to play for, I think that's going to be a lot more of a feather in the cap for Raheem Morris and this coaching staff to sell ownership. Hey, you should be able to bring us back. So I think this is an important game for this coaching staff in order to win. And we'll talk about, if this coaching staff here in Atlanta, as well as in LA, can inspire certain players to win their matchups to help them win the game. And we'll get into some of those key matchups as we continue today's Crossover Thursday, presented by PrizePicks. Today's Crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. With the holiday season being on us, it is the best time of year for sports, whether we're talking pro, college, basketball, football, bowl games, playoff pushes. It's all happening right now. And since we're making choices every single day, one of the best places to make the right call is PrizePicks. It's the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stat projections. You can lock in your lineup and you're in the game, and you can create a lineup in less than a minute and choose from a huge range of unique stats, yards, fantasy score, field goals attempted, free throws made, turnovers, whatever fits your strategy. And with PrizePicks, it's simple, fast, and available in 45 states, including California, Texas, Florida, and yes, Georgia. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. So continuing today's Crossover Thursday here on Locked On Rams and Locked On Falcons, presented by PrizePicks. Before we get into these key matchups, I want to let you guys know that you can join the Everydayer Club. We thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of both of these podcasts. You are the reason why Locked On is now the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. And you can level up by joining the Everydayer Club at the link in the description below. $5 a month, $50 a year. You get ad-free versions of both Locked On Falcons and Locked On Rams, depending on which one you subscribe to. You don't get both, but you can get ad-free versions of the pod, as well as access to a exclusive members-only Discord server for the entire Locked On Podcast Network, so you can interact with all the Locked On Rams and Locked On Falcons everydayers that are part of that club, as well as many other perks at the link in description below, Locked On Rams or lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. So, Travis, let's get into some of these key matchups. And I know, starting for me with the Falcons, I think one of the things that I'll be focused on is how does this Falcons defensive line hold up against this Rams offensive line, that with this Rams revamped offensive line, with some of the bigger bodies that they've had on the interior, this is kind of the style of offense and run game that typically the Falcons have struggled with throughout the years. They have struggled throughout this season with their run defense. They've been a little bit better in the back half of the season in terms of slowing down opposing teams' run game. But if this Rams offense can just kind of get rolling, as they often like to do, running the football with Kyren Williams and Blake Corum, that's going to take a lot of pressure off of Matthew Stafford in this passing game that may or may not be down Devontae Adams and whatnot. And so I think this is going to be a great litmus test for this Falcons young defensive line to sort of see how they hold up against a physical offensive line like the Rams.
Yeah, the Rams O-line has had a kind of a weird couple of weeks. Like it actually maybe even longer than a couple of weeks. Coming into the season, it was one of the major question marks on this team, whether or not they were going to be able to protect an aging quarterback with a bad back who didn't participate in training camp. And they've done an incredible job. They really have. And they've done it with some guys coming in and out of the lineup that Rob Havenstein hasn't played in the better part of a couple of months, and they put Warren McClendon out there. He's held it down. Like, I don't think we've talked about him since, which is, everybody knows that's good news if you're an offensive lineman. If your name's not getting said out loud, that means you're doing a pretty good job. We lost K-Dot last week. He got stomped on in the middle of the game against Seattle on his ankle. So he's, I think, very unlikely to play. So, when the Rams struggle with their line, it's almost always from the middle. It's almost always, the tackles have usually done a pretty good job of holding up, but when it does break down, it's usually from the middle. So Justin Dedick goes in to replace Kevin Dotson at right guard. So, and Dotson was having a Pro Bowl level season. So him out, we'll see what it does. Dedick did a pretty good job against Seattle, who does have a pretty formidable offensive or defensive line, I should say. And he stood up pretty well. So I think you're right. I think if the Rams O-line can continue to do what it's done most of the year, they've got that 1-2 punch of those backs. And, for a long time, it was Kyren Williams and then a little bit of Blake Corum. And then it was Kyren Williams and a little bit more of Blake Corum. Now it's almost even. They touch the ball about the same amount of time. They're a little bit of a tell that when Williams is in there, I think they're slightly more likely to pass the ball than when Corum's in there, because Kyren Williams is a better blocker than Blake Corum. So, but yeah, and if they can keep Matthew Stafford, one of the things I think that the Rams will have on their mind, if they can't get back up to that, top spot in the NFC West, top spot in the NFC overall, is let's go win Matthew Stafford the MVP, to kind of put that feather in his cap. And if that means they can light it up and give him another, he threw for almost 500 yards and 3 touchdowns against the Seahawks. And even though they lost, I think that he kind of held his position, like you mentioned, near the top of that MVP list. So the Stafford matchup against Drake May, the Stafford matchup against Josh Allen, even though they're not going to be in the building, I think is one to keep your eye on, because I know what it would mean. Sean McVay's checked just about every box there is to check in this league as far as winning Super Bowls, going to Super Bowls, being kind of a made guy, but he hasn't had an MVP. He hasn't had somebody that's doing what Matthew Stafford's doing. And I'm sure, as much as everybody would like it for Stafford, I'm sure McVay would like it for the organization as well.
Yeah. Now, when you look at this game, what sort of other matchups are you keying on?
Well, I think what's interesting is whether Puka is going to be able to continue to do what he did a week. Like Puka had probably the worst week leading up to the game that he's had as a Ram. He just stuck his foot in his mouth, 3 different ways in about 10 seconds. It was just a really weird thing. And the Rams don't do weird, noisy, loud, like what's going on over there stuff. Whenever you hear somebody talk about the Rams nationally, or really even locally, it's almost always about the football. It's about McVay. It's about Stafford. It's about Aaron Donald. It's about Puka Nacua. It's about just all these great players that they've had come through here. But it's almost never, what's up with that guy? We just haven't had a lot of that. And we did. And then he went out there and went bananas. He had 225 yards, pair of touchdowns. And he did it all without Davante Adams on the field. So I think, the matchup of him against the entire Atlanta defense, can he continue to find a way to thrive in the way that he has, is one that I'll have my eye on, because I do, just knowing what I hear with my ear to the ground with the Rams, the Rams people are kind of like, seriously, dude, like this is what we're doing right now. I know, I get it. You might be the best wide receiver in football, but now is not the time to lose your mind. So I'm really curious as to how he responds with week 2 of everybody kind of looking down their nose at him.
Yeah, I saw something in like a thread on Reddit that had nothing to do with football, where someone was bringing up Puka Nacua, and it's like, this is not the week to talk about Puka Nacua.
No.
It's been a bad week for Puka Nacua. So it had nothing to do with football, but yeah, I think that's going to be a big challenge for the Falcons. Obviously, if Davante Adams is not expected to play, that's easier for the Falcons to deal with rather than 2 top-notch wide receivers. But still, as you mentioned, Puka has been a one-man wrecking crew, and I'll be curious to see how the Falcons address that. They'll probably try to get AJ Terrell as much as possible on him. It's been a rough couple of weeks for AJ Terrell after a really, really strong season, one of his better seasons, but being matched up against like JSN, one of the things that the Falcons threw a little bit out there in the early going in that Seahawks game a couple of weeks ago was that they had AJ Terrell shadow Jackson Smith and Jigba, and they also kind of gave him safety help with one of their 2 safeties. And I wonder if the Falcons will lean more into that this week as a way to try to slow down Puka Nacua. But because the Rams like to move Puka Nacua all around the formation, that strategy becomes a little bit harder for the Falcons. But the best strategy, I think, for the Falcons to slow down Puka Nacua is not allow Matthew Stafford to get the ball off. And so that's going to be, again, one of those trench battles. And I'm kind of hoping to see the Falcons kind of tee up their blitz. I know Stafford is a veteran type of quarterback that can pick that apart, but I think early in this game, you try to go after Stafford, you force him to beat the blitz, force him to win that way. And if he does burn you with Puka Nacua and all that, then, so be it. But I think trying to sit back and just letting Stafford, sort of pick apart your defense, I don't think is a good strategy. So I'm eager to see if the Falcons can bring that extra pressure to let some of these young edge rushers like James Pierce, Jalen Walker, et cetera, really shine this week.
Yeah, Stafford, it's funny because I like it when people send people after Stafford. It's one of the cool, more of that, because like you said, Aaron, he's been around a long time. There's not a ton of stuff he hasn't seen. He's been in the Sean McVay offense for a while. I think he understands it as well as any quarterback understands any offense, and he knows where the spots are. He knows, and he's gotten to that point too in his life where he's really good about not letting you hit him. Like occasionally he'll take a sack, but it's very rarely where he holds on. Like when it's over, it's over. That ball can be on the ground, it's out of bounds, it's over somebody's head. He's not letting guys tee off and do it. And one of the things that they've been really fortunate of, even if Davante doesn't play, and I will be stunned if he's out on the field on Monday night. They've got some other guys that have really started to step up. They've used their 3 tight ends. Terrence Ferguson, who was their first draft pick, not a first round pick, but their first pick that they took last year. He was a really slow starter this year, and he's been really good of late. Colby Parkinson has been much better. Kenan Mumfield, one of the guys that has gotten a chance to play with Davante out, has done a really good job. Jordan Whittington. So they have a ton of weapons there, and when they do those 3 tight ends and they line up, they're really tough to deal with right now. They it wasn't a matter of them their inability to move the ball against Seattle. They just couldn't get any stops, which was pretty unusual. So we'll see how that flips around. One of my favorite things about Sean McVay is after they have a tough loss, after they have something that just doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's pretty rare where you say just, what's going on out there, they respond effectively. And I think they will. I think they will show up. I think they will tighten up. So I'm optimistic that they can get it done on that side as well.
Yeah. So we'll see if they can do that. Travis, I think it's time to get into some of the keys to victory for each of these teams to find a way to walk away with a win as we wrap up today's Crossover Thursday here on Locked On Falcons and Locked On Rams, presented by PrizePicks. Now, these days, anyone can advertise and claim that they'll handle your injury case, but some people aren't even real lawyers. They're just out of state companies looking to cash in, and others will promise lower fees but leave you with lower settlements. That's why you gotta call John Foy and Associates. At John Foy and Associates, they have a proven track record of getting Georgia clients real results for more than 25 years. They don't just settle, they win. I love that they treat every client with dignity, compassion, and respect, and they're available 24/7 to take your call. So don't try to fight the insurance companies alone. Call John Foy and Associates today at 404-400-4000. That's 404-400-4000, or visit johnfoy.com to get started. They don't just settle, they win. Get the strong arm. Call attorney John Foy and Associates today. So wrapping up today's crossover Thursday here on Locked On Falcons and Locked On Rams, presented by PrizePicks, let's get into some of the keys to victory. And I know for Travis, one of the big ones for me is going to be Bijan Robinson. We haven't talked about Bijan Robinson yet, and he's going to be potentially one of the best players on the football field besides players like Matthew Stafford and Puka Nacua, and has a real big opportunity to really help this game because I think, as you mentioned, I don't think the Falcons want to get into a shootout with the Rams because I feel like the Rams are much more better equipped with Sean McVay at the play caller, at the coordinator position, and with Drake London not 100% compared to Puka Nacua. Like, all that favors the Rams, that if they get into a shootout with the Falcons, they're going to favor it. So for me, the Falcons run the football, right? Control the clock, keep that Rams offense off the field, right? And I think featuring Bijan is going to be a major part of that. And also in the passing game, there are agendas at stake here on Locked On Falcons. Travis, you have a certain linebacker that used to play for the Atlanta Falcons, and Nate Landman. And Nate Landman has played really well for the Rams this year, but one of the reasons why he's not an Atlanta Falcon were because there were some perceived limitations for him in the pass coverage. And I want to see if those perceived limitations are still there by getting him matched up one-on-one in open field against Bijan Robinson. And I feel like that favors the Atlanta Falcons, but I'm curious what you think of that.
Yeah, it's funny. Like when Landman came in the first part of the season, everybody's like, we just got this guy? Like, who is he? Where'd he come from? Because his trajectory was just like this throughout the season, just getting better and better and better. He's punching the ball out. He's sacking the quarterback. He's getting interceptions. It's quieted down a little bit in the back, third of the season or so. But don't get me wrong. He's been very, very good. I think you're right. I think where he is least effective is in coverage there. So we will see. Hopefully the rest of those guys get to the quarterback with Jared Verse, Byron Young, both named to the Pro Bowl. So Kobe Turner coming off one of the best games that he's had as a Ram. He had a sack and a half and an interception. It felt like he was going to kind of be the MVP of that Thursday night game before everything went a little screwball all there at the sudden. As far as for me, as I look at it, the Rams' key to victory, like the Rams have only lost 4 games all season. 3 of the 4 losses are directly tied to failures in the special teams department. I mean, and it's not one of those well played. It was catastrophically bad in 3 of their 4 losses. The game they lost to Carolina, they just lost because Matthew Stafford threw some interceptions and fumbled the ball. They lost to Philadelphia because they had 2 kicks blocked in the fourth quarter. They lost to San Francisco because they missed a chip shot field goal and then started to have to go for it on 4th down in weird situations because they didn't trust their field goal kicker. They lost in Seattle a week and a half ago because they couldn't cover a punt and got a punt return that flipped the game like that for a touchdown. And then they missed a very makeable field goal towards the end of the game. They finally, Aaron, got around to firing their special teams coach last week. You very rarely see a good team, and I believe the Rams are a good team, fire a coach this deep into the season unless the whole season is spun out of control. They fired Chase Blackburn. I'm shocked it took as long as it did because they just couldn't get it right. And I think that what happened against the Seahawks was the last straw. And if the Rams are even just okay on special teams, they don't have to be the best teams in the league. Just be okay. Make your field goals that you're supposed to make. Cover your punts and kickoffs. I think they're going to be in really good shape. I know that sounds simple. It's not for these guys. This has been by far the weakest spot of this team all season long. They're on their second kicker in Harrison Mevis. He missed his first kick of the season last week, but it was also the first kick he took under any sort of pressure all season long. So there's a lot going on that side of the ball. They're going to score points. I think they're going to come back and be much better defensively. You can move the ball against the Rams. I think most teams have this season. They're pretty good at that bend, don't break sort of philosophy. But their special teams is the great equalizer, or in the Rams' case, unequalizer, because no one has any idea what they're going to roll out there at any point. So I think that's where my focus goes to as this game starts, is whether or not they can make their kicks and prevent big plays on the other side.
Yeah. Now, that third phase of the game, special teams has also been a major weakness for the Falcons. And I'm sure Falcon fans are like, man, why couldn't we fire our special teams coordinator, Marquise Williams? And he's probably going to be removed at the end of the season, regardless of what happens with Raheem Morris. And, you know, the Falcon special teams as of late, though, has been slightly better. Not because they've played particularly good, but they've played some other teams that have had bad special teams like Tampa Bay and Arizona the last couple of weeks. And so this is another game where if the Rams don't respond to this firing of Chase Blackburn, you know, this is another opportunity where the Falcons could potentially win that third phase of the game. And as you mentioned, that could be the difference between making up the ground that I think most of us perceive when it comes to the Rams offense and defense versus the Falcons offense and defense, that if they can make up that ground, and it could boil down to a blocked kick here or field goal made here, that could wind up being the result of this game. So I do think certainly special teams is going to play a part in this game. Travis, is there anything else you want to share with the listeners before we end this very special crossover Thursday here?
Well, I have one for anybody that might be watching us on YouTube. If you're just listening to the podcast, I don't know if this is going to land quite the way that I want it to, but I'm looking over your right shoulder, Aaron, and I believe you're the first crossover host I've ever seen that has Rams gear in their background. That is an Aaron Donald poster that I'm looking at right there. So I'm getting good vibes. I feel like that's a good omen heading into Monday Night Football, that the Falcons host has an Aaron Donald collage back there. And by the way, I love it. It looks great.
Yes, that's the wall of goats back there. I got Aaron Donald. I'm a Pitt alum, so celebrate Aaron Donald here on the show. Julio Jones is also behind me, and Toph Beifong from Avatar: The Last Airbender. All goats when it comes to that particular wall and whatnot. But we'll see if Bijan Robinson, Matt Stafford, or Puka Nacua can make their case to go up on that wall potentially by their performance on Monday night. Jared Verse also in the mix as well. So some superstars that are going to be on the field in this Monday night matchup, and we'll see who comes out on top for this Rams-Falcons game. The Rams being favored by 8.5 points over at FanDuel Sportsbook, our friends. So go check it out. And of course, go continue to make Locked On Falcons and Locked On Rams your first listen throughout the week as you guys, celebrate these holiday seasons. And of course, Locked On NFL is also going to have you covered for all of the Week 17 action. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. Your team every day.